From coast to coast, Donald Trump has had an epically bad week in the courts, cutting across virtually every single one of this administration's major agenda items. All week long, federal judges and courts absolutely shredding key Trump administration moves, slamming them as unlawful, unconstitutional. Here's just a sample. A judge reversed Homeland Security's termination of the protected status of thousands of Haitians and Venezuelans. An appeals court ruled most of Trump's tariffs illegal. Washington, D.C. sued over the National Guard deployment there. A judge found Trump's cancellation of Harvard's funds illegal. Another appeals court blocked deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Another federal judge found the National Guard deployment in Los Angeles was illegal. And numerous grand juries have now failed to indict a growing list of Justice Department targets. There's a whole lot there. And Trump's opponents are probably feeling pretty good, pretty thrilled to see all of this play out. But MSNBC's legal analyst Andrew Weissmann did have some words of caution this morning. Listen.
When you think about what he did with, let's say, firing FBI agents and career prosecutors, or what he's done with law firms issuing these executive orders, from his perspective, even if he loses, he wins. The people who he fired from the Department of Justice, they're gone. They're bringing lawsuits. Even if they win those, eventually, they're still gone. And all that happens is the government pays back pay. Every single executive order that was challenged has been struck down. The district courts are unanimous, saying they violate the law. But the effect is still there. So from his perspective, it's like it's not even waiting for the long term. He sort of wins no matter what, even with the courts saying there's a problem.
And joining us now, Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent and host of MSNBC's Can They Do That podcast, and Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. Great to see you both. Lisa, I will start with you. Is Andrew right in your view? Even if he loses, he may win?
I think that's a very astute assessment of what's going on, because in addition to the fact that those people are gone, for example, in the cases that Andrew was talking about, when we think about the National Guard, for example, in these cities, he is slowly inuring Americans to the idea of troops in their cities. And each of these cities is sort of different by degree. Initially, the National Guard, for example, came into Los Angeles because of protest activity, right? They were there in the first instance to protect federal personnel and property from the threat of protest activity, or at least so they said. Then they went to D.C., whereas Elise noted, as you guys were talking in your opening, the legal framework is a little bit different. The president controls the D.C. National Guard. Now, in ratcheting it up and going to Chicago, neither of those circumstances are present. They're not bringing in the National Guard because of protest activity. They're not bringing in the National Guard under the guise that the president controls the Illinois National Guard. Certainly he does not. But we are all sort of now used to a scenario where we see on our television screens troops marching through our cities because he has said the level of crime in America's major cities, all of which, not coincidentally, are led by Democrats, is such that it deserves federal intervention. So even if legally that's not true, over time, he is encroaching upon our ideas of what our cities are supposed to look like and who is supposed to be in charge of law enforcement within them.
And it seems that, you know, not to put words in your mouth, but it seems like what you're describing is that the damage is done, right? So even if there is justice, like the way Andrew described it, for the employees who've been fired, if they do get back pay, if they're somehow compensated for whatever injustice may have happened to them, the damage to our employees and what they are responsible for, the damage to how our cities are supposed to function, that is irreversible.
That's absolutely true. And the same thing is true, for example, in the context of law firms, right? You've got 4 law firms that have litigated against these executive orders that he has put against them. Each and every one of them has won at the district court level. And yet there are many others that have either settled with the administration on terms that have yet to be reduced to paper, and many, many more others that are sort of cowering under rocks, hoping that he doesn't notice. But in the meantime, Are they continuing to partner with the kind of impact litigation groups that handle pro bono litigation on behalf of immigrants in this country? Certainly not with the same force that they did before President Trump retook office in January. Absolutely not. If you talk to people at organizations like the ACLU or other immigrant serving organizations, they will tell you that large law firms are few and far between with respect to offering assistance. And that matters at a time where immigration enforcement all across the country is ratcheting up, right? And you see removals and all sorts of excuses for removing people's efforts to naturalize themselves or get their status regularized in this country. When law firms disappear, irrespective of whether they're the focus of his executive order or not, that's another place where damage is done.
Paul, so can you explain why, if the LA deployment was ruled illegal by a lower court, why is Trump still empowered to pursue this in other places around the country if one court has said this is unconstitutional?
Because that ruling only applies to California. And so at this point, he says that, hey, he might still send troops to L.A. regardless of what the judge says, but he also says that he's going to appeal the ruling. So the issue is whether he can, against the wishes of the governor, who's the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, send in someone. And the judge let him have it in that opinion. He said that it really looks like Trump is trying to assemble his own national police department with him as chief.
So basically, the overall strategy is one court might knock you down, but you just keep going, keep handpicking a new target, a new territory.
I mean, that seems to be the story of this administration
and
for months now.
See what sticks.
Especially when you know you've got 6 buddies on the Supreme Court, the 6 ultra conservatives who have the same expansive view of executive power and will do what he wants. But what I love about these district judges is that they're seeing through Trump. They're saying, we see you, we know who you are. He often uses the law as a pretext. And so his real problem with Harvard is he thinks it's too woke. But his administration pretends like it's anti-Semitism. So the judge in that case says, yes, Harvard has a problem with anti-Semitism, but I don't see how cutting off research funds for breast cancer and veterans' health care addresses the issue of anti-Semitism. There's this doctrine called the presumption of regularity, which says that when the government comes to court, we give them good faith. Judges assume that what they're saying is legit. Trump no longer gets the benefit of the doubt, and I think that's something his administration has earned.
Lisa, it's been a rough week for the administration in court, but they have also had some wins.
Yes.
For example, take alligator Alcatraz, for example. At least for now, they're going to be able to continue operating. What do you think comes next in that fight?
I mean, look, the plaintiffs in that case are certainly going to appeal, but let's remember also what that legal fight was about. It wasn't about the legality of Florida operating its own immigration detention center. It was about environmental law. It was a bunch of environmental groups basically saying that this section of this airstrip that had been deserted in the Everglades couldn't be built upon under a federal environmental law. So, yes, I think there will be an appeal. But in the meantime, Ron DeSantis has already taken steps to open a second and a third immigration detention center in his state. And in that legal victory that you were just referring to, one of the judges on the 11th Circuit basically legitimized Florida's interest in immigration enforcement. That's always been understood by judges to be solely the province of the federal government. And so when a federal judge says, no, the state has an interest in this too, that's an alarming development in and of itself.
I want to ask you about what is happening specifically in D.C. with Judge Jeanine Pirro, who's kind of taken this very tough language against protesters and people who've been opposing what the National Guard has been doing there. She hasn't been able to get the grand jury to basically go along with an indictment against some of these people, including the guy who threw a Subway sandwich at members of the D.C. National Guard. How rare is it that a grand jury doesn't go with the indictment recommendation of a sitting U.S. attorney?
To say that it's rare is a mad understatement. I appeared before that grand jury many, many times. Never saw it. Our colleague Joyce Vance at DOJ, 25 years, she never had a grand jury refuse to indict, in part because the system is so rigged in favor of the prosecution. You're the only person, the prosecutor's the only person in the room, defense attorney isn't there, extremely low burden of proof, probable cause. So it's really tough for a grand jury not to indict if the prosecutor asks. Shout out to our grand jurors. Again, Joyce Vance, never seen it in 25 years. 7 times just in the past couple of weeks. And they're fulfilling their constitutional responsibility. The framers said, we want the people to have the last say over who gets charged with a felony because we trust them more than we trust an overbearing government. An overbearing government, Jean Pirro, that's kind of her emblem.
Wasn't the joke, that like you could get a ham
sandwich indicted,
but now this whole Subway sandwich debacle, I guess, has turned that on its head.
Dude threw a salami sandwich, just for the record. But he's charged. Pirro charged.
Thank you for that fact check.
All about the facts here. But Pirro charges him with felony assault on an officer. He could get 8 years for that. The sandwich barely grazed his face. I think he would have been worse off eating that sandwich.
Would have really appreciated the grand jury's decision. I think they would have liked
Yeah,
that.
the
Paul
defiance.
Butler, thank you so much for being with us.
Facts matter, Paul. Thank you.
And Lisa, you're sticking around.